Hi, I'm Simon and welcome to a very special episode of Gamers Living Room. Today I'm going to be talking about a technology that I have been waiting to get my hands on, at least in the home, for more than 20 years. And it's special because, well, it's breathed new life back into the corpse of this channel. I could have put this video on my other channel, but I thought, no, I'm going to make a two-part special video. One part, the one you're watching, about the hardware, and the next part is going to be about software. So, let's take a look. So you can tell from the video that obviously I'm going to be talking about virtual reality. But before I talk about the headset, I want to spend a few minutes talking about my experiences with VR before I got that. So this goes all the way back to 1991, I think, when I first heard about VR. And it was a company called Virtuality, a British VR machine manufacturer who was making them for arcades. I'd seen it, in magazines. I'd seen their stuff on television, and I thought, wow, I really want to try this. And it wasn't until a few years later, to around the mid-90s, that I actually got to try one. And I have to say, I was completely underwhelmed. It was a real disappointment. After imagining that I was going to be immersed in this virtual world, it was nothing like that. I put the headset on. There are two little televisions basically in front of my eyes, and that's really what it felt like. It felt like I was looking at two small CRT screens, and when I moved my head, the tracking was off. So there was a latency, a lag as I moved my head from side to side. The image didn't keep up with my movements. And both of these things together completely ruined the experience for me. I can barely remember what the game was that I was playing. I know it was only a few minutes that I played it for, and I think it was about £5 a go, which back in those days was really expensive. I mean, I can remember there was a controller that represented a gun in the game, or was represented by a gun in the game. And I think there was a pterodactyl in the game. I really can't remember much about it. I just remember it being a bad experience, and it put me off virtual reality for years. My dreams were dashed by that one. And it wasn't until many years later when Palmer Luckey showed his Oculus designed or prototype to John Carmack, and then when John Carmack showed it at E3 and the rest of the world found out about it, and that's when obviously I found out about it and really decided I've got to try virtual reality again. This sounds amazing. And a little while later, I think it was 2014, when I managed to finally get my hands on Oculus's second development kit. And I have to say, it was pretty cool, even though it wasn't designed to work on the Apple Macintosh, which was the only computer I could use it with. It still gave an immersive experience. And I remember vividly the setup program where you're at a desk and you just look forward, click the mouse, and then it can determine where you are in relation to the camera. And on the desk, I remember there was a plant and a pyramid of cards. And I can remember looking down at it thinking, oh wow, I can look around, I can crouch down and look through the cards. And then at that point, I got a real sense of, yeah, this is something special. This can really work. Unfortunately, 5 minutes later, I loaded up the first experience, which was walking around a villa. Was it called villa or casa? I can't remember the name, but like walking around a Spanish or Italian villa. And it was nauseating. I remember thinking, that I was going to throw up. I got motion sickness sweats within the space of a minute. Well, maybe not that quickly, but within a few minutes. The problem for me was you controlled it with the joypad, and wherever you looked, when you pushed forward, that's the direction you went in. So if I'm traveling in this direction and then I look over here, I start going in that direction, and it's really uncomfortable. And I can't believe that they thought that was the best solution to go with. Surely the direction you're pushing in, the way your body's going is where you should go. But anyway, it was the very early days of VR. But it was quite a shame to go from, wow, this is amazing, to, oh, I feel sick within the space of half an hour. But I decided to take the sensible approach after trying a few, or the limited number of games and things that were available on the Mac that worked with the Oculus. I decided to sell it to someone who would get more use out of it than me. And so I put it on eBay, and I was quite lucky because when I bought it from America, from Oculus directly, it was $350 for the headset and the camera, another $80 for shipping, so $430, which I believe at the time was only £285. Crazy to think where the pound and dollar are today. And yeah, I think I sold it for £330. So even after eBay had taken their cut, I still made a little bit of profit. But that wasn't the motive for selling it. I would have happily let it go for less than I paid for it, just so I didn't lose all my money on this thing that I knew I wouldn't use. So that's happily off in someone else's hands now. I put the money in the bank and then used that money, or well, not all of it, but put it towards buying this, the HTC Vive. Now I'll say it right off the bat, this was the headset I had been waiting for. I'm really happy with this purchase, and I'll tell you why I chose this one as opposed to the alternative, which was the consumer version of the Oculus Rift. Now the first thing that attracted me to this is that I could interact with the things in the virtual world using controllers. Now I know now Oculus has its touch controllers, but at the time only this one had hand controllers that you could use in VR. They're not as good as I would have liked them to have been. I mean, they're very functional is probably the right word for them. They're not particularly comfortable to hold. I mean, I'm quite partial to shooting games, and this thing doesn't fit in your hand in the same way. I mean, if it was like that, it would actually feel more like a gun grip. But the shape of it, the triangular shape, when you grip it, or at least for my hands, maybe my hands are a bit small, it's okay, it works, and I've played hours and hours of shooting games with this thing, but I so wish it was closer to a gun grip shape. But one good thing about them is they're very robust. I mean, I've scuffed up the top of this controller on more than one occasion, getting a bit overexcited, and kind of clunked it on the wall where you know, I've been playing a game that requires either hitting a ball or a melee type action and forgotten where the wall was, or even though, you know, there are systems in place to show you in the virtual space where the real world, or the boundary that you have determined to be your play space is. It comes up with a grid when you get too close to it. Yet still I've managed to clonk the controllers a couple of times. I've dropped them accidentally a couple of times, but they still seem to be working fine. One little negative point is the button, the big button in the middle. It's the same type of button that you've got on the Steam controller, and the touch sensitivity on it is perfect, but the actual clicky button could still do with a bit of work. Sometimes there are games that require you to sort of push on the outside of the controller to move or the control button to move faster, and it doesn't register it properly. So that's a little bit disappointing. But the fact that they track so well in the virtual space is the other and probably the most important reason why I bought this. And that's all down to this, or well, it comes with two of them, these lighthouse base stations. And to me, this seemed like, and still seems like, the more elegant solution when compared to the Oculus Rift's Constellation system. As I said before, with the Rift, like the DK2, you have a camera and that sees the headset. It sees invisible infrared LEDs inside the headset. And it worked well enough on the DK2, it tracked it well, and I've heard that it can track very well on the new consumer version of the Rift. But this system, all of the sensing is done in the headset. So the headset has all of these little divots all over it, which have all got little sensors that can pick up laser lights being spread out from this in a grid. So you've got two of them, one at each corner or opposite corners of the room, and I think they can be up to about 5 meters apart. So they shoot out an invisible grid of light, and the headset and the controllers and any other devices that have got these sensors on them, because there are things coming out this year that are going to have this technology built into them, they can calculate where they are in space, and it tracks so perfectly, one to one. It's every little movement I make with the controller is represented in VR. I mean, in the kind of the loading screen, or the construct, if you will, if you think of it from a matrix perspective, it tracks perfectly, almost. I mean, I've actually held the thing in front of my face, lifted up the controller to see if it's exactly where I expect it to be, and to be honest, in virtual space, it looked just a tiny bit smaller, at least to my eyes, but tracks so well, really good. And the other reason why this appealed is because of this. That may seem strange, but I'll explain. When this came out, I thought the only sensible solution, or the only near-term solution to this, would be to have a backpack or a laptop with some kind of computer on your back, and this headset plugged into it. And because the base stations are not connected to the computer, then you can be completely free. Whereas with the Oculus, because the camera or cameras have to be plugged into the computer, then even if you did have a backpack, you'd still need wires connecting to the cameras. So I thought, well, obviously I'm going to go for this one, because for room scale, I want to be free of this thing. Now, much to my surprise, last year I heard that there are wireless solutions coming out for this thing this year. In fact, I believe that one of them has already been released in China, or had they already taken pre-orders and it's being released at the beginning of this year, but coming out soon, even if it isn't out already. But that kind of solution would also work with the Oculus. So I think whether you've got this one or you've opted for the Oculus, wireless technologies are coming to free you from this cable. And I have to say, for this particular headset, I'm not sure what the one is like on the Oculus, but it is horrible. It's heavy. The one I've got is 3 cables bonded together, You've got the HDMI, a USB, and a power cable. I know this has now been replaced with a single cable where they're all, I guess, braided in together. But it's still covered in, I think, a grey sheath like this, which I would guess is better, but still, you want to be free of this because, firstly, just having it dangling around and getting caught up in your feet breaks the immersion. You've got to be aware of cable management if you're thinking about playing a very intense action type of game. Another thing is that it gets knotted up really easily. Again, for that type of game, if it's a game where you're moving around, turning, shooting at things over here, ducking down, jumping about, you know, within an hour, this thing's knotted up to the point where it actually ends up getting pulled out from the little breakout box that plugs into the PC. It doesn't shut the game down when that happens, but obviously you lose vision, so you have to quickly whip off the mask, plug the thing back in again, put it back on, and hope that you haven't been killed or whatever in the game in the meantime. So that's the HTC Vive, and a very interesting system. Expensive, about, well, it's £680 when I bought it. It's about £750 in the UK now. I think the price in the US is $800, and I think it's pretty much stayed there, although I have heard there have been discounts and rebates at some point, or cashback. But I would say, for me, that's a fair price. But unfortunately, I had to also buy a PC to run it on. Whereas the next thing I'm going to show you, I wouldn't have needed to. And that is Sony's PSVR. Now, I've been quite lucky that a good friend here has loaned me this for a couple of weeks to sort of play the system at length and also to make this video. Now, this headset is a much nicer design than this. I mean, whether you like the aesthetic or not, well, that's just personal taste, isn't it? But what I mean by a nicer design is that it's much more comfortable to wear because of the padding and the extendable, retractable halo ring that sits around your head. You just kind of put it on and it rests on the sort of the top of your head, or your forehead, more like a hard hat would, rather than the HTC Vive, which kind of has to press itself against your face using Velcro straps, much like ski goggles with another strap over the top. So this thing's lighter, it's more comfortable to wear for a longer time, but because of the design, I do notice that light leaks into it a bit more than on the Vive. But as I mentioned with the other one, the cable being such a problem, on this one, because of the types of games you play on it, the cable is not so much of an issue, because most of the games for this are seated or standing still, standing upright types of games. And then you just have the cable running down the side of your body. And to be honest, I didn't find it bothered me anywhere near as much as this heavy thing going down my back. But I'm sure the thing that you would like to know, besides, you know, the ergonomics of it, is how well does it compare to what you get with the Vive, and when you consider the price difference. Well, I have to say, from the experience I've had with it so far, admittedly, I've played it nowhere near as much as I've played the HTC Vive, but the experience is really quite favourable in some respects. Well, let's first talk about image quality, because I think that's the place where they are closest. The HTC Vive has two 1080 by 1200 screens, one for each eye, whereas the Sony system has a single 1080p panel. But because of the pixel arrangement inside the Sony system, it doesn't look inferior compared to what's in the Vive. In fact, because of the pixel arrangement, the screen door effect, that effect where you can see the individual pixels, is less noticeable on the Sony system. I've also noticed that the Sony system is nice and vibrant. It's as colourful as what you'll see in the HTC. So the hardware itself has the potential to be pretty much, or visually, as good as what HTC have got. But the difference is obviously what's connected to it. This is running off either a PlayStation 4 or a PlayStation 4 Pro, compared to the gaming PC I've got connected to this, and then even less so compared to other people's gaming PCs. The hardware this is running off is fairly weak. One thing it does have is a secondary breakout box. Quite nice little design. It sort of matches with the PlayStation, or at least probably looks better next to the old type of PlayStation that I've got. And that does some of the processing. It helps to split the signal and send it to the television for those types of games where one person plays with the headset on, other players or a single player play with what's on the television. And this provides a sort of a bit of an extension to the cable, so you can sit a bit further away from the screen. But therein lies a bit of a problem, that you can't really sit too far away from, well, at least too far from the camera, because if you get out of the sweet spot, which seems to be about 1.5 meters from the camera, things can get a little bit jittery. So where I said with the HTC Vive things track perfectly, with the Sony system using the Move controllers, it's more of an approximation of hand placement. So to give you an example, there's a shooting game on the Sony system called Rush of Blood, I think it's called. It's like a roller coaster, haunted house ride where you've got guns, and it never really feels like the guns are in your hand, because, well, you kind of point generally in the direction where you want them to shoot, but it's not like on this system where you kind of hold the gun up and you look down the barrel of it and shoot. It just doesn't work to that level of accuracy with these. I mean, obviously this is a fairly old system. I mean, I bought one of these back when the Move first came out. I think I bought this on launch day. I mean, that's fairly embarrassing. I must have been really swept up in the motion controller hype, that fad that was going on back then. But the second one is I got my parents to pick up from CEX or Cash Converters, somewhere like that. That as soon as I knew that the PSVR was going to be fully compatible with these PlayStation 3 Move controllers, and they weren't going to come out with a new system, then I asked them to pick up another one. It was £10 for another one. I think I paid about £35 for the other thing you need, which is the PlayStation camera. There is a newer version of this camera, and it does have a little stand at the bottom, which I'm sure makes it easier when placing somewhere to find that perfect spot to track your VR setup. So I'd probably recommend, although I haven't tried the newer camera, I'd probably recommend it because this one is a little bit tricky to find good placement. And the camera and the controllers are really, it's like the tracking solution is really the weak point of this system. It's the thing that's really noticeably different between the two of them. I mean, I know Sony had invested in this tracking solution and they'd put the light bars on the controllers. And well, we've got that same setup here on the front and a couple of lights on the back of the PSVR, but it's really not a good solution. I'll give you an example of when I first played it, before I borrowed it, my friend brought it over, we set it up in here, and I can't remember which, we definitely played Rush of Blood, and we played a couple of demos of other games. But one of the things I really noticed that was very different compared to this is that things would sort of wobble and shake a little bit. Now this is because we hadn't found the right sweet spot. We hadn't sat in the right position. But for a lot of people that's going to be a problem because they're not going to want to rearrange their front room to accommodate this. You'd want this to be able to fit in with any living room. So something like the HTC Lighthouse system would have worked much better for this. You know, a couple of discrete little devices you can put, one in one corner, one in the other. Preferably if they were battery powered would be even better. I mean, these need a power supply to run, and then you know you just use your equipment without having to worry about, oh, am I going to be tracked correctly, am I sitting in the right place. Something like the Lighthouse grid can cover the whole area, and the device, the Vive, can know exactly where it is in that space. The Sony system, it's a real shame because I think for the environment it's designed for, it doesn't really work as well as it should. So playing it in the other room where I can put the camera on the desk and I can sit back a bit from it, it doesn't work too badly. But there is one tracking issue that really annoyed me, and it's not to do with the games, it's actually to do with the theatre mode. It drifts round to the left. I've tried 3 different games. I tried Resogun, Uncharted 4, and disappointingly, Battlefield 4. And I say disappointingly because I was getting so involved in it. I sit fairly close to this 65-inch TV to play these sorts of games, and yeah, it is somewhat engrossing because maybe a little bit more because it's a curved screen as well. But playing on this headset in theatre mode where everything's black apart from the screen, I felt that much closer to the action. It's not quite the same as being in VR playing a military shooter, but I was surprised by how much I enjoyed playing Battlefield with the headset on. But the annoying thing is, within a few minutes, the screen's over here. So, alright, one option might be just to follow it round as you're playing. The other one is that you have to press the options button, hold it down for a few seconds, and then it resets to wherever you're looking, but you don't want to keep having to do that every 2 minutes. So I've got no idea why that problem hasn't been solved, because in any other games. So say, for example, I'm sitting in the cockpit of a spaceship. 2 minutes later, the nose cone is not pointing over there. It's right where it was when I started the game. Half an hour later, it's still in the same place. But for this, in theatre mode, it just drifts. And if that, I can't even fathom why that's an issue. And if it was, why it hasn't, if it was an issue from the start, why it hasn't been resolved. It's perplexing, because I think that's actually quite a good use for this. Even if you're not playing VR, especially if you're a young kid who can't afford to have a large screen TV in their room, this is quite a nice experience. It's comfortable enough to wear for a long period of time, so you can watch movies, you can play games in theatre mode. I would have loved something like this when I was a kid, just tucked away up in my bedroom, watching, maybe watching the sort of things that young men like to watch, but also watching respectable movies as well, and playing video games. It would have been a really nice bit of kit to have, aside from the drifting theatre mode. So, I think that pretty much covers the hardware from my perspective. I'm no expert on these things, but those are my 2 cents as far as these are concerned. I suppose one last thing, I forgot to mention the face pads, because on the Vive, the face pad is actually replaceable, and it comes with 2. It comes with the wide face one, or the one that's in there, narrow face for people like me with small heads, and they do get a bit sweaty. This thing, because it doesn't press right up against your face, that's not so much of an issue, although I have noticed fogging is more of an issue in the Sony headset than it is in the HTC. Well, I think that's it for hardware. Let's go into the games room and try both of these out and have a look at some of what I think are the more interesting games that I've played on these systems. We're now ready to play the HTC Vive. Not depth of field, but 3D. Very cool.